Welcome to Access Europe for December. Good of so many of you to turn up for a return visit by fellow MVP Mike Wolfe, all the way from Pennsylvania. And Mike is going to be doing a talk about import-export specification workflow with VBA classes. And he's done a few articles on this on his website recently, and there'll be some files available for you to download. So that's Mike's website, nolongerset.com. And that's also the page on my website and on the official Access Europe website, where you can find out more details about this. Over to you, Mike. And if you'd like to start sharing your screen, please do. And if you'd like to introduce yourself some more as well, that would be great.
All right. So as Colin said, I'm Mike Wolfe. For those of you that don't know me, I've been an Access MVP for a couple of years. And so that didn't work so well. So about 2 years now, I've been an Access MVP. I've also been a SQL Server / Access developer for about 16 years. I own a small software development company in Northeast Pennsylvania, the United States. One of the top all-time contributors to the MS Access tag over at Stack Overflow. I have to check that before every presentation because I haven't really actively contributed there in about 10 years, but because of the way the algorithm works, I got a bunch of early answers in and it just keeps building the reputation up over years. But the main thing is I do write daily articles over at nolongerset.com on a whole variety of topics concerning Access, VBA, version control, which is my big kind of pet project to try and get version control out there more in the Access community. So yeah, there's a newsletter you can sign up for. Part of the daily articles is that every Saturday I do a week in review, which includes the 7 articles I wrote that week, or the 6 other ones, and then also articles and videos and upcoming user group presentations, the Access roadmap, and a bunch of stuff from the Access community. And that's just a week in review that goes out. So like I said, there's an email newsletter you can sign up for there. And then Sunday morning, you can wake up, review the what's happened in the Access world over the past 7 days. And anyway, people seem to like that feature. It gets a little bit of exposure out for some of the people. I appreciate that Colin is one who publishes regularly enough that I have something to put into a week in review article. So anyway, a little bit about me. And now we'll jump into what we're going to cover here today. So not sure why the text isn't coming through in white there. So we'll just show them all on the screen at once. So basically what we're going to do is look at the import-export wizards. These are the legacy wizards that have been in place going back for as long as I've been working with Access, to at least Access 97. Probably predates that as well. They're old enough that they may have been written by actual wizards. And you'll see that that they're dated in some ways. But at the end of the day, they are still fairly powerful and fairly simple, but there are some really annoying limitations and problems around them that after enough time working with them, I finally got fed up and put in the time to build a class module to minimize the amount of time I had to actually work in these wizards. So Access actually changed the way that they do. Didn't necessarily change the way that these worked. They added an additional layer on top, probably around Access 2007, which is the data tasks, and those are the XML files that get created at the end of an import-export wizard, where it asks if you want to save these steps for later. That gets saved into a data task, and that's a whole separate topic that Colin is actually going to be covering in, I believe it's May of 2024. He's on the schedule to do that. So what we're going to focus on today is purely the legacy side of things. And all the specification, all the settings and the configuration is stored into system tables. And so we're going to look at those system tables a little bit. And then we'll dive into how the class module works, how you can incorporate that into your workflow, some of the key features of that class module, and then just talk about using class modules in general, because that's something that is an underused feature among Access developers, as far as I can tell. And I know when I first was learning about how to use class modules, that a lot of the examples online were things like you can create an animal class, and then you can create different types of animals. You can have a cat and a dog, and none of that is useful in any way when you're writing an Access application. So trying to make that conceptual leap between a cat is a type of animal to how would you actually use a class module in an Access application and make your application easier to maintain, and why would you want to include this? So part of, while ostensibly this is about import export specifications, the other big thing that I'm trying to accomplish here is to just show a good practical example of why you might want to use class modules in your Access development work. Okay, so using the import wizard. So we're just going to start with a demonstration. And so these are some of the things that we're going to cover as part of this demonstration. We're going to go through importing a text file, saving an import specification, updating that import specification, because that's where the thing really breaks down, and then just briefly how to use the saved import spec in VBA. So this is, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but I think there's important context that we need to set so we can kind of understand how the process works, and why I feel that the class module approach that I've got is an improvement over what's there already. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to minimize this, and so we're actually going to start from a completely blank database. And so what I'm going to do here, just as a heads up, while I'm going through this, there are going to be some incorrect settings that you may notice if you've got a sharp eye as we're doing this. I'm intentionally leaving some of those in there so that we can fix them with subsequent changes to the import specifications. So you can try and watch to see if you can catch what those are, but you don't need to let me know about them as I'm going through. So those are going to be intentional. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to go to the external data tab, and we're going to come up here, new data source, from file, and we're going to load a text file. Okay, so we're going to use everything because I love everything. It's a great utility. I think Crystal actually just recently wrote about this. I've written articles about it as well. But anyway, this is the sample data, and all this samples that I'm going to be doing during today's presentation are currently on my website now at nolongerset.com. So you can follow along with the recording later, but they're all published there, so you'll be able to go through this as well on your own. Okay. So we're in here, we're going to go with, we're going to switch this to delimited. So you can see this text file is not a standard CSV, it's a pipe delimited file. So instead of commas, we've got pipes in here. There's no quotes to delineate the text fields. One of the nice things about a pipe delimited text file is that you're not dealing with escaping double quotes. Of course, if you've got embedded pipes in your text, then you've got something else you have to deal with. But anyway, so we're going to stay with delimited here. And now, again, because these are we have to switch from the comma. We're going to make this pipe delimited. And the nice thing is that you have this preview that comes in. And so it makes it, even though the wizard itself is kind of dated, there are some really nice features that are built into this. And again, there's no text qualifier needed. We're setting most of the settings for the file on the whole. And then when we come to this next table, this is where we're going through and changing some of the column specific settings. So just double checking my notes. So now when I come to advanced, we're going to go in, we're just going to save this specification. And to make it a little bit easier to work with later, we're going to call this sales spec. Okay. And we're going to import it to a table called sale. And again, this is the process I was talking about, that if you click save import steps, it's going to create an XML file, or it's going to create XML. It's not an actual file. I'll leave all out to Colin to cover later. This is not something I've actually done much with. Okay. Now, not all of our data was successfully imported, and there are error descriptions with associated row numbers that can be found in this table. So we're going to look at those here in a minute. Okay. So now we've got the import errors. Is the shipping tracking number. It was identified as a long integer, but of course, those numbers were too long. They weren't going to fit. You're going to have overflow there. So you can see those two columns now are they're completely empty, so that none of that data got brought in. If you notice also, in addition to the shipping tracking number, the order date didn't come in. So even though they were formatted as dates, it didn't come in through the import specification. The ship dates did. Now, the reason the ship dates came through is because they were in as text fields. And so you can see we can put in a letter there, and it just sees it as a text field. So so interestingly, if we just use that format to put it in, Access handles that without any problem. So let's go and redo the import, and we'll also, as part of that, we're going to as part of sorry about the loud dings here. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the spec. So now we saved it before, so we don't have to, all those settings are already in there. So we can go ahead and open this up. And if you notice, there's this date order. So the date order by default assumes that it's in month, day, year order. Now, of course, that's not the order that the file is actually in. So if we open this up, I'm going to open it up in VS Code. So I deleted the sale table, but even if I had wanted to go now and look at what the sale table is, or if I wanted to go in and see what the import errors were, I can't do that. I don't have access to anything because this is it's a dialog window. So it's not going to let me do anything. I can't go in and look through my code if I had something in the code that I wanted to check out. So this is another one of those things that that's annoying. and it's not as bad for an individual user, especially if it's a power user that's having to go through and do this. But when you're trying to develop something that's a repeatable process, a lot of times you've got this file import or a file export that's part of a larger process, and you want to be able to refer to other parts of the code to check things as you're going through and doing this. And of course, if I wanted to go and look at the code, I have to cancel out of all these things, find the spot in the code, come back in here and do that. So let me drag the file over here now. Okay. So as you can see, the date order is year, month, day. So we're going to switch that up here to year, month, day. And the other thing that we have to do is the date delimiter. So the date delimiter, it assumes that it's a forward slash. And if you look down here, it's actually an end dash. So we're going to change that. And then the other one that we're going to do here is the shipping tracking number. So we're going to change the shipping tracking number to short text. Okay. We're going to continue to leave this ship date set to short text because I want to leave that as a change that we make once we get into the class module later. Okay. So we made those changes. We're going to save those. Overwrite the existing spec. Okay. Through here. Choose that same primary key again. So now, even though I just saved this, the reason that it's asking me about this, and I had to do some testing to figure this out, I think it was because of that when I switched the option to choose my own primary key in the last screen, that's not actually something that gets saved with the specification, but just making that change there is enough for Access to consider this specification dirty now. I'm just going to say no because I saved the changes I wanted to earlier. Okay, so now we got rid of the import errors. Everything came in fine. Of course, the one thing that we don't have is the ship date is still as a text field. But like I said, we're going to get into that, handle that later. Okay, so we imported the text file, saved the import spec, updated the import spec, and now we want to use that saved import spec in VBA. So now we're going to switch into VBA here. And I'm just going to leave that in there so that just as a convenience, we're going to get rid of the sale table before we re-import it. So it's the do command function. There's a transfer text, which will basically do everything that the wizard does. Although there are I did discover a couple bugs. I think they're bugs in here, which we'll mention later. Import it into the sale table, and the file name is something I'm going to provide, and say that it does have file field names. Okay. Okay, so when I run this, and I'm actually going to comment that out briefly just to make it clear that it's actually doing something. Delete the table. And we're going to run that. And you can see that it used the sales spec because, again, the order date is imported correctly. The ship date is still showing as a text file, or as a text field. All right. The export wizard, it's very similar. one, I wanted to cover it just because this is about import and export specifications, and there are some things that I want to show the to contrast, to show the similarities and the differences between the two, in that it's odd the way that Access stores these things. It makes no distinction between an importer and export specification, but the wizard itself does. And so it's a little bit odd, but we're going to go through and do this pretty quickly. But I am going to have all the actions so that you can follow along on the video if you want to come back later and kind of do things step by step. But to keep the presentation moving, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. So, okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to import a clean copy of the sale table. And I'm actually going to do this from an XML file. And I wrote an article about this within the past week or so. Just it's a handy way to exchange table data, especially like a lot of people here work on online forums, and with Microsoft making it so difficult to exchange MDBs and anything that could have code embedded in it, the XML files are they're all text-based, so it's pretty safe to trade back and forth. And you can see that the order date and the ship date are all the way we want them in here now. Okay. So, like I said, this is about the export process. So here we're going to come up, export to the text file. And that's fine. We're just going to go with the default here. Move the field names on the first row. And we're going to leave it as comma delimited for now. And it's something that we're going to show you how we can change that here in a second. So we're going to just save these specs. And we're going to call it a sale export spec to distinguish it from the import one. Okay, next. File we just created. Okay, comma delimited. We've got the quotes around the all the fields, especially the text fields. Notice that we've got this time element in here, and again, as most people on this call probably already know, there's no date only field type in Access, so every date is really a date time, and if you don't specify a time, then it has an implied time of midnight. So that's what this is showing, is it's including that midnight time in there. So we're going to close that, and we're going to go in and we're going to manually update that export spec now. Okay, so we've got the sale table still selected. We're going to go in. Yes, we want to replace it. We're going to load the saved spec. And you can see both of them are here. So again, this is what I was talking about. It even shows when you go to load these specifications, import/export specifications, they're treated the same way by Access. So the main thing that I wanted to show here was we're going to make those changes, and we're going to save the spec. Okay, so now if we look at so whereas before you had we had the commas in between, we had the quotes. Now we've got pipe characters, and there's no more quotes except for the embedded quotes, obviously. And now we still have these, the time in there. Now, this last thing that I wanted to show is if I went and did an import, and so now if we go into the sale export spec, it brings this up. And what we can do is we can actually change these to a short text. And I'll just change one and not the other. We're going to save this spec, overwrite it, and now we're going to cancel out of here. And we're going to go back in here and we're going to create another one to test the data export. Okay, so if you see now, the fields themselves still have the same data type. Right, so they're still both date times in Access, but they got exported differently based on the export specification data types for those columns. Now, to be honest, I would never rely on this. Generally, I find that I don't use the export specifications all that much. Anyway, if I have something really specific that I need to do, a lot of times I'll handle most of that kind of formatting stuff in a query. And so I don't really rely on that. I just wanted to sort of prove the point that making certain changes that were not available or literally hidden in the editing the export specification still had an impact on using that export specification. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation quickly. So this next thing, we're gonna look at the related system tables and see where these things are actually stored. And I've got a link in here, which I'll go ahead and bring up so that can load while we're reviewing. Okay, so they're hidden system tables. So again, to get access to them, you would right click here and come into navigation options and come down here and show system objects. So I've already got that checked. But by default, you won't see these. So this first table is the specifications themselves. So these are the specification level settings. You can see the spec name, and most of these field names are relatively self-explanatory if you're looking at the field name alongside of the dialog box. You can see how these things correspond, and actually bring this over. So this is the article that I wrote, and as you can see, I go through and document how each of these things how they match up with the actual wizard fields. So and then I also have documented what the individual numbers are for the ones that are have numeric things, like the specification type is delimited or fixed width, etc. The date order is another one. So anyway, that's something you can go back and refer to later. And then here are the columns, and you see the spec ID. So it's every time we go in and we save the spec ID, Access is deleting and recreating these, which is why on a brand new database, we're already at spec ID 3 for the import spec, and then number 11 for the export spec. And these start and width columns are ignored unless you're doing the fixed width stuff. So that's what those are. Okay, like I said, I don't want to dwell too much on that. Instead, kind of the main event, and I feel bad we're closing in on the end. So probably spent too much time providing context here. And I'm also going to need to bring in my error handling, my minimal error handling, just so that it's going to compile. Okay. So one of the things that philosophy that I kind of have is that if you're going to do this stuff, you want to make it, put a lot of time into the tool that you're going to be using a lot, so that when you need to call that tool, it's as easy as possible. So what you're going to see is, in order to call this and actually use it, we're in the class module itself, and I've got a header here and in usage. So we're just generating the code, and we just throw that up here. And the first specification, if you remember, is sales spec. And so what it does is it creates this this routine that we can copy. So what's going to happen is, before we run this transfer text, it's going to come down here and it's going to basically use the class module to create or update these specifications. So the specification name, the date delimiter, you can see all of this code was generated based on the existing specification. So we've got the date order, which we changed. And the other thing that it does is it only includes non-default settings when it's generating the code. And then it also has an individual line for each one of the columns that are in there. So if we run that test sale data import, let's just make sure that sale table is closed. All right, so to show how this is useful is we're going to change that ship date column here and make that a date field. So as you can see, it's currently set as a DB text. Change that to date. And we're going to run that import again. And now it's in there as a date field. So you can do this. You can change other things. Let's see. We'll change the name of that first column from ID to sale ID. See, it's got the sale ID name up there now. The other thing that it said, it has the settings for all of basically anything that you can do through the wizard, you can do using the class module. So we can set this up. We can add the indexes. Unfortunately, when you import via the do command transfer text method, it does not actually create the indexes, which I think is probably a bug. I thought it was a problem with the class module when I first ran into this, and doing a little bit more testing, I realized it was just it was the transfer text problem. You can see the index type is getting updated, and I don't want to take the time, but if we were to go in, I can, it doesn't take too long. So you can see those indexes were updated. They're just not, Access just isn't honoring those when you do the import using the transfer text. So again, I think that's a bug. I haven't had a chance to report that and confirm whether that's expected behavior or not, but it doesn't seem like it should be expected behavior. Okay. So here's a couple of key things that I wanted to point out. So one, I wanted to make sure that the configuration was idempotent. So all that's really saying is that you can run it multiple times and it won't break, right? So if every time we ran it, it was inserting columns or inserting records into the MSysIMEXColumns table, then you'd end up with key errors. You'd have too many things. What I wanted was to make sure that it was something that you could easily run every time. So you can just make it part of your process, and it goes through and it will do what it needs to update all these things. The other thing that it does is if you were to drop one of these columns, this purge unused columns method, what it's doing at the end, this is how it knows to get rid of any columns that are already that don't get defined. And I think that the main reason that I had this in here is that if you wanted to be able to change a specification and you just want to change the configuration, the specification wide settings, but not change any of the individual column settings, I want to make sure that there's some safety checks in here so that it won't just delete all the column settings. The other thing was documenting options with enumerations, right? So instead of what's actually saved in the table for creating an index but allowing duplicates is the number 1. So what I could have done here, because what's actually saved in there, so this is the setting, this is the value that gets saved in the table. But of course, the compiler wouldn't care if that's what we did. The programming language wouldn't care if that's what we did. But somebody that's reading the code isn't going to know that 2 means an index with no duplicates allowed, or that 1 means an index with duplicates allowed. For one thing, they wouldn't know what that even had to do with. You'd have to come in and hit spacebar to even know what the name of the argument was that you were trying to include. So it's an index type, but just come in and glance at the code, you wouldn't know that 2 or 1. And same thing with the db long is 4. So this line of code could just as easily be sale ID 4 2. Honestly, these look more like widths to me, a starting and an ending value or something. So anyway, that was important to me to be able to have that in there. And so the way that I did that, because there's not show you quick in the generate code. So what I have is I've got a bunch of functions that are just converting those enumerations at the top to strings. So we go the index type to string. So we've got the index type, which is declared as using these public enums. And what somebody was mentioning before we got started about the enum naming convention that I use, and I mentioned that it took me a while to kind of settle on that. This class module predates that, so the way I did the naming for the enums themselves, if I were to do this now, it would be IES with 2 underscores for the enum, but it's a little bit of a diversion there. So anyway, VB.net and other languages have reflection to where you can just, based on the index number or based on the enumerated value, you can find out what the name of the enumeration itself is. Unfortunately, VBA doesn't have that. So you have to manually go through and do this. But I think it adds enough to the readability of the code that it's worth doing. File type is the same way. The thing I wanted to mention here with the file type to string, these are all the different code pages. And in the wizard, there's a code page drop down, and there's dozens of code pages listed. Didn't seem to make sense to me. For me, there's only a handful that I would use, and so I found these ones just over time for the ones that I use, especially for the international audience here. Your list of commonly used code pages is going to be different than what I've got here. So anyway, there's some links in here to those, some of that information as well. Let me just come back here. So thought I'd have a little bit more time to spend on this, but I mean, my day is free. I'll hang around for as long as people want to ask questions. I wanted to just briefly go through when you'd want to use classes. One of the things that classes are really nice for is that they can preserve state between calls, and while also hiding that, so you don't have to have a bunch of global variables. If you've got values that you want to continue to work with over several calls, you don't have to maintain them in local variables or in a global variable somewhere. You can keep all that state together in one place. If you've got a lot of related variables among routines, so if you find that you're writing standard functions, and as you're calling multiple standard functions, you're passing along the same 5 or 6 variables to those functions, that's a code smell that maybe whatever it is that you're doing would be better combined into a class module. If you've got many instances of a thing, and I think this usage sort of falls into that, so you can have many different import-export specifications. Each instance of this IMEX class would deal with a different import-export specification. ORM is an object relational mapper, so if anybody that's worked with .NET, they have the entity framework. Most web applications nowadays, Django introduced, this is one of the early ones that made this popular, the idea of creating objects in the language that map directly to relational data in a database. Dot-driven programming, I've got a link in there. The way I use constants in my code, I actually have a class with a pre-declared ID. It's just the letter C. And so if I want to use a constant, I do C dot, and then I've got a whole sort of like menu of all of the global constants that are available to me. By doing it that way, it keeps it out of the global namespace mostly. I've got one place where all those global constants live, and it's a lot easier to discover. Again, the IntelliSense provides that, and so that's a good example of using the pre-declared ID feature of a class module. And then the final one is WithEvents to do generic event handling. So if you want to handle, put in a handler on a text box so that every time it enters, the focus enters into a text box, it highlights that text box, and then when it exits, the highlight goes away. That kind of thing. You can build an entire system just around that concept, and you could do that. You could then write an entire series of articles about that concept, and then you could present that concept at the next Access User Group meeting.
Okay, right. Tim.
Yeah, thanks. Really quick one. In the middle of the presentation, you said that the wizard even though it was in the export or import specs that it was going to be either unique or non-unique index, but then the table doesn't actually get the indexes created, and you wonder whether that's an access bug. I'm assuming then if we were using code like the code you've demonstrated to us today, we could just add those indexes in VBA code. So if we know the indexes aren't going to be made and we know they're supposed to be there, we could just code them in VBA to make sure they're there present after we've run the transfer text command.
Yeah, exactly. And that was actually when I discovered that the other day, I meant to mention that as a potential improvement that could be added within, like you said, to handle it within the class module. The class module, the usage would have to be a little bit different, because the way that I'm using it now, I'm calling this define spec, defining the sales spec and then doing the transfer. Obviously, you'd have to have something here
afterwards. That was like, implement indexes or something. Yeah. Is that something you would do? I mean, I suppose you could hand code it yourself, couldn't you? But once we've done this, but it just strikes me that if there is an issue there in Access, and for some reason transfer text is not creating those indexes when it jolly well ought to, then maybe that would be version 2, perhaps. But brilliant, thanks ever so much. You've answered my question. Thank you.
Sure.
But thank you again, Mike. That was a brilliant talk. And as I said, there were a lot of questions, but they were answered largely during the chat session earlier on. If I could just remind people then that on Mike's website, there are a lot of the files already. The database that he created during this presentation will be added, and also these files will be available on both the Access Europe website and also on my website, and that will be probably tomorrow, I would imagine. But I needed to break off because, as I said, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm also conscious of the fact that next month, we will again be sticking with the class module theme. And Ramachandran, who is based in Kerala in India, most of you, if you know of him, will know of him as APR Pillai. And he's got a very, very long established website, MSAccessTips.com. And he's been doing, I think he's now done 19 articles about using class modules instead of form and report module code here to streamline the code. Ramachandran, would you like to take over at this point, and do you want to share your screen?
So this particular database is coded in the class modules only. I mean, fully all the controls, event procedures, and supporting forms, all programs are, event procedures are coded in class modules. I will show you on sample screen in design view, and let's display its code. So the employees form, let me find out the employees. Command button, combo box. Now this is the form module, employees form. Only the instantiating, the class module instantiating line, then the form load event procedure, and passing the form object to the property. And this is the form unload event procedure. Most of the forms will have this kind of 3 or 4 lines of code. Rest of them are coded in the class module. This is command button code in a separate wrapper class, command button wrapper class. It's running in here. All the event procedures are running from command button events are coded in here. But in this particular case, only one click event is there, and then command heading, another command button code, only 1 line, 2 line code. But all the programs are running from from the class module only. Forms are having some of them doesn't have any code, and some of them have few lines of code just to bring the class modules into memory.
Thank you ever so much for that. I just wanted to take over from your screen. What I want to do, I've got the PowerPoint on there, which I don't want. I just want to drag across And this is Ramachandran's website here. And this is the first of, I think, 19 or 20. I lose track because he adds one another every day, just about, more than that, including updating some old ones. It would be well worth your while before next month, at least reading some of these, not necessarily all of them, so that you actually have an idea of what Ramachandran's doing, because it's very different from what most of us do with form and report module code and so on. Any questions for either Ramachandran really quickly or Mike before I do end the meeting? I apologize for interrupting you, Ramachandran. I'll give you full time next month. No? Right. In that case, I'll say again, thank you ever so much, both for Ramachandran and for Mike for presenting today. We'll have the files for Mike's presentation on my website and the Access Europe website in the next day or so, and they'll be also on his website. Mike, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Right. Thank you again. Your voice held out. Well done. I had to keep turning my microphone off to make sure I hopefully didn't cough, and I hope my sound didn't break up too much during the meeting there. But thank you. That was excellent there. Right. I'm going to end the meeting now then. All right. Thank you again to everybody, and we will see you just after the new year for Ramachandran's talk. Thank you ever so much to all. All right. I'll see you soon. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Colin.
Bye now.
Bye.